The Westeros of Aegon's youth was divided into 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, and there was hardly a time when 2 or 3 of these kingdoms were not at war with one another. The Writings of Gyldayn, the World of Ice and Fire, Aegon's Conquest. Within only a handful of days of his first coronation at the Aegon fort, Aegon's armies were on the march yet again, this time with his sights set much further afield than the Crown Lands. The greater part of his host forded the fast-moving Blackwater Rush, once across the river, making south for Storm's End, through the ancient and thick Kingswood. This single army made up most of the Targaryen forces and was under the command of Orys Baratheon, Aegon's most trusted friend and advisor. Queen Rhaenys would follow Orys on the march from the sky, astride her dragon Meraxes, the golden-eyed dragon with gleaming silver scales. The Targaryen fleet, under the command of the now master of ships Daemon Balerion, left Blackwater Bay and turned north for Gulltown and the Vale. With them went Queen Visenya and her dragon, the mighty and fierce Vhagar. The king himself marched northwest with a small army towards the waters of the God's Eye and Harrenhal, the gargantuan fortress that was the pride and obsession of King Harren the Black. Of course, Aegon would be flying his own dragon, Balerion the Blackdread, so while he had a smaller army, the protection a dragon offered mitigated this fact. Harren had begged the Riverlands and the Iron Islands alike to ornate his dream. The Thoughts of Catelyn Stark, A Clash of Kings Chapter 7, Catelyn 1. All 3 of the Targaryen armies faced rather fierce opposition, more so than history would imply. Lord Errol, Fell and Buckler, bannerman to King Argilax Darandon of Storm's End, surprised the vanguard of Orys Baratheon's host as they were crossing the Wendwater River, cutting down more than 1,000 men before quickly fading back into the trees. It was one of the largest single losses of life for Aegon during the conquest, but sadly inevitable. Meanwhile, back in Blackwater Bay, House Arryn managed to hastily assemble a fleet, mostly augmented by a dozen Braavosi warships, which cost a small fortune to hire. They managed to defeat the Targaryen fleet in the waters off Gulltown before a single ship could land troops ashore. While less men died in the waters of Gulltown as in the Kingswood, House Targaryen still suffered some huge blows from this loss. Perhaps the biggest was the fact that among the dead was Aegon's admiral and master of ships, Daemon Balerion. It is speculated that Daemon did not foresee the hiring of the Braavosi ships, which added not just numbers to the Arryn fleet, but skilled sailors as well. Even Aegon himself was not immune to some of these troubles. As he marched for Harrenhal, he was attacked on the south shore of the God's Eye, not once, but twice, by a small force who disappeared as fast as they had appeared. While the Battle of the Reeds was a Targaryen victory, they still suffered heavy losses at the Wailing Willows, when 2 of King Harren's sons crossed the God's Eye in longboats with muffled oars and fell upon Aegon's rear in the dead of night, before once again disappearing into the darkness. Dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. Quaithe to Daenerys Targaryen, A Clash of Kings Chapter 27, Daenerys 2. While House Targaryen did suffer these losses that are overlooked in the legend that became the conquest, in the end though, Aegon's enemies had no answer for his dragons. While the sailors of House Arryn and the Braavosi warships did indeed sink a third of the Targaryen fleet, and captured near as many in the waters of Gulltown, they in turn too paid a high price for this apparent victory, because in truth it was not a total victory for House Arryn, and they would learn the hard way the power a dragon has. In the midst of the battle, Queen Visenya descended upon them from the sky and burned just as many of the Arryn ships. Meanwhile, in the Kingswood, Lord Errol, Fell and Buckler hid in their familiar forests, using the treetops to hide their movements and disappear into nothing. That's until Queen Rhaenys unleashed Meraxes, and a wall of fire swept through the woods, turning the trees into torches, burning all in its path. And on the God's Eye, as the sons of Harren the Black fled back to their castle after the victory at the Wailing Willows, they were all too ill prepared for when Balerion the Blackdread fell upon them out of the morning sky. Their longboat burned in black and crimson flame, every man, including Harren's sons. Not a single man, including Harren's sons, escaped the dragonfire to tell Harren of their apparent victory. But even so, Harren most of all would not heed the warning of the power of dragons. But it was not just Aegon who saw opportunity in a conquest. Aegon's foes also found themselves plagued by other enemies, who used the distraction of Aegon's conquest to launch their own attacks. The Stepstones, an island chain at the bottom of the narrow sea between Dorne and Essos, has proven a lawless den for petty kings and pirates for centuries, with it only ever briefly being under the control of one free city or another. They would prove to be a thorn in the side of Argilac the Arrogant, the Storm King, as he gathered his men at Storm's End. Pirates descended on the shores of Cape Wrath to take advantage of the absence of the fighting men. There were, of course, token forces left behind to defend the Cape, but not near enough to prevent the bold pirate attacks. But Argilac didn't just have to deal with the attacks on Cape Wrath, because the Dornish were, being Dornish, as Princess Mira Martell sent raiding parties out of the Red Mountains to sweep across the Dornish marches, sacking many settlements and keeps, and carrying off gold and captives for ransom. In the Vale, the boy king Ronald Arryn had to contend with a rebellion on the Three Sisters when the sistermen renounced all allegiances to the Eyrie and proclaimed Lady Marla Sunderland their queen. However, given the isolated location of the Three Sisters and their lack of manpower, while an annoyance for the boy king and his mother, Queen Regent Shara Arryn, they were not a real threat to the Vale itself. They very much believed the situation could be dealt with after this would-be High King of Westeros had been defeated. While near all of the kings had their own issues, none more so than Harren the Black, whose vice-like grip on the Riverlands was now being tested. He was greatly resented by many of the lords of the Trident, and in Aegon Targaryen, they saw hope in a better future, one without the tyranny of Black Harren. When you take a look at the bigger picture of Aegon's conquest and the legend it had since become by the time of the main books, it's easy to see why both the events itself and Aegon Targaryen and his sisters are held in such high regard. But when you were looking at events so far removed, a lot of the finer details start to get lost. And this is the case with Aegon's conquest. It is presented as this very easy thing, given how little resistance Aegon realistically faced. But there are some issues with it that get brushed over very quickly in the history books. Aegon did lose battles, some of them quite badly, with House Targaryen taking heavy losses. Yes, in the Battle of the Wendwater, their attackers were using both hit-and-run tactics and their knowledge of the forest to their advantage. They killed thousands of Orys and Rhaenys' men, which is worse when you consider how small the Targaryen army was in the first place. If it was not for Meraxes burning the forest, Orys and Rhaenys may never have gotten out of the Kingswood. I don't think the issues Aegon faced on his march to Harrenhal were all that impactful or dramatic. As we see in the main book series, and in real-world history, it's very common and almost expected for attacking armies to be harassed on the march by small forces of opponents. They know these attacks will not win them the war, but they will do two things: slowly whittle down the numbers of the foes, and slow the line of march down, as they both keep watch for attackers and deal with attacks themselves. Again, the presence and impact of Balerion really minimize the impact these hit-and-run attacks had. The loss in the waters off Gulltown is another matter altogether. The Targaryen fleet at the command of Daemon Balerion was soundly defeated. It's all well and good saying they didn't expect the Arryn fleet to be augmented by the Braavosi Salsels, but a good commander may have foreseen an event like that happening. I've often speculated that the presence of Visenya and Vhagar made Daemon Balerion perhaps approach the battle with a sense of overconfidence. Still, despite the loss, again, Vhagar proved the power of a dragon and somewhat mitigated the losses suffered during the battle.